Hello and welcome back to another video. Today here again on Forza Horizon 5 to show off every track on the Formula 1 calendar built here in Event Lab. So today in part 1 we're going to do the first half of the season from Bahrain to Spa, which is when the summer break takes place, which is actually where we are in the season at the time of recording this. And then in part 2 I'll be back to take a look at all of the tracks that are going to be coming after the summer break, from Zandvoort all the way to Yas Marina for the final round of the championship. The first track of the season is of course Bahrain nowadays. This one was obviously built in quite an early version of Event Lab before it really received any updates, as it seems to be mostly built out of metal platforms, and the start grid is a little bumpy to say the least. It is a pretty accurate track layout though, and is one of these sort of sky track style events built entirely off the ground, which means we're not really limited to a lap number you just drive down and cross the finish when you've had enough of driving around the circuit. For round 2, we're moving across to Saudi Arabia for the return of the Jeddah. This version of Jeddah seems pretty accurate and well made. At first glance the walls look kind of bumpy, but that's because rather cleverly they're actually laid over each other in a way that you can't really clip into them, which is a problem you often see with event labs, so hopefully that won't happen if you're racing this route. The only annoying thing here was that the mountain was spawning in and out of existence in the background, which is quite distracting, but as you'll see throughout this video, and as you've probably seen in previous things where I've looked at Event Lab routes, that is a kind of quite common issue with the volcano if you build anything in that location, unfortunately. Then on to what used to actually be the season opener for Formula 1, Australia. This one was beautifully made, but was probably less accurate scale-wise than the previous two. The high-speed chicane in particular isn't very high speed, to be honest. The creator of Bahrain actually made a version that I think is more accurate scale-wise, but had less detail added, and like Bahrain was made out of metal, so I thought this kind of much better looking track made out of tarmac was a better way to go than the slightly more accurate version, because it does look pretty incredible. This one is actually a nighttime 5-lap blueprint set to anything goes, but there is also a 20-lap version, although that one is also set to nighttime. It does look stunning in the dark though, to be fair, so I kind of understand why the creator has made that decision. Then we go on to Baku, which, if you thought Australia looked good, this one is truly stunning. Although in reality it's not my favourite track, this one is beautifully made, and I think probably the best you're going to see in this first half of the F1 season, partly because it was clearly built more recently than some of the metal ones, with prefabricated buildings there to sort of fill in the gaps, but those mixed with some of these sort of beautiful custom creations to kind of give the proper feel of that circuit. The sort of more iconic buildings and landmarks have been recreated, and then the space is filled in with the prefabricated ones, I think works really well and makes this map look absolutely beautiful. This blueprint is only 4 laps and is restricted to S1 class, but there's also a 24-lap anything goes version if you want to do a sort of more full race here. But yeah, this is my absolute favourite of the tracks we're going to see today at least. So, now from the best track you're going to see today to the worst. Not to take away from any of the creators of these routes, because I know how difficult and time-consuming it is to make these, but all the routes of Miami were absolutely awful from what I could find. This is actually the best one I could find, and to be honest, it's more of a Miami rallycross track. In reality, I also very much dislike the Miami Grand Prix anyway, so no great loss. On to the next one, which is of course Monaco, one of the most iconic tracks on the Formula 1 calendar. Like a few of the other routes, this was clearly built quite early on in the lifespan of the game. Just like Bahrain, it's made out of metal platforms, and is another sky up track, sort of above the ground style build. So again, you can do as many laps as you like, and then come down and cross the finish line in the pit lane when you've had enough of lapping the circuit. On to round 7 in Catalonia then. This one seems to be the actual surface itself the smoothest so far, or at least on level with Australia and Baku. I did find another version that was actually slightly more accurate scale-wise, but it was much bumpier and sort of less polished overall, so this is the one I'm featuring and kind of recommending you use if you want to go and race Catalonia. It is mostly made out of tarmac pieces, but does also incorporate a road section for the main straight. Next up then, the circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, Canada. This one is also made by Embryo, who made Bahrain that we started with at the beginning of the video. Also evidently built fairly early on in the lifespan of the game, built out of metal platforms and the similar sorts of barriers. Although this one has a more accurate pit lane and sorts of green runoff areas to look like grass, and curbs, unlike the Bahrain one that we looked at earlier. It does seem pretty accurate too, except for being slightly narrow in places, and I think the final chicane in particular is a little bit tight, but that might just be because we were racing in a Ford GT and not a Formula 1 car. Onto the Red Bull Ring next, which the creator has obviously taken quite literally. The track is actually red. Judging by the props used, I would say this was also built pretty early on, and unfortunately suffers from the missed start-finish line problem you get, that if you're on slightly the wrong bit of the track, sometimes it doesn't count crossing the start-finish line, which is a problem I've actually encountered on a lot of my own routes as well. Round 10 at Silverstone sees another creation from XR Cosworth. Again, this one being smooth and great to race, much like the Catalonia circuit we saw from them previously. This one, though, is slightly more accurate than the Catalonia track, and has also been detailed slightly more nicely with some curbing and grandstands, and overall just feels a bit more like a proper circuit. And although there's no kind of props in the background, buildings or anything, it really felt like Silverstone driving around here. For round 11, I really struggled to find a good replica of the Hungaroring. The best I could find is this one, which is very slightly scaled down version of the track. It is, though, incredibly bumpy and has some strange hovering bits of track above it. But it is titled as a beta version, so potentially we'll see some changes in a full version one day. I'll certainly be keeping an eye out for any updates to this route. And finally, round 12, the final race before the summer break on the F1 calendar, is Spa-Francorchamps, which I'm actually very familiar with this version of, having used it in challenge videos previously. It is again made out of metal platforms, which is slightly a shame, and it's a very much scaled down version of the real track, this one. It is, though, relatively well made and quite a lot of fun to race, despite these few problems. And that brings an end to today's video, taking a look at the first half of the Formula 1 calendar built in Event Lab here on Forza Horizon 5, with some routes being better built than others, my particular favourites being Albert Park and Baku, but also Silverstone I think needs to be mentioned because that one was pretty accurate. It just didn't have quite the backdrop that those two other ones did. So those three are the ones I would really recommend going and giving a go if you haven't already. But that is going to be all for today's video. I'll be back very soon to take a look at the second half of the Formula 1 calendar from Zandvoort all the way through to the final round in Yas Marina. But for now, that is going to be all. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next video very soon.